Yod Gimel ER in a nutshell. We may not tell someone a negative report concerning his or her close relative. We may not speak Hilchos to a non-Jew. Relatives and non-Jews. Chaya, my washing machine just died and I need a new one fast. I'm not sure if I should go to Mr. Felder's appliance store or Mr. Adler's. Do you have any preferences? I'll tell you, sir. Both of them have sterling reputations. They're as honest as they come, and they stand behind the merchandise. But you know what my husband told me. He feels Mr. Adler doesn't just sell appliances. He knows appliances. He understands how these machines work. So when he recommends an item, it's with first-hand knowledge that his appliance is the best of its kind. Mr. Felder, on the other hand, goes by what he hears from the wholesalers. That's okay, but it doesn't compare to being electronically savvy, so I feel more confident buying from Mr. Adler. Please don't repeat what I just told you. I wouldn't want to get back to Mr. Felder. If Sarah can be trusted not to repeat this conversation, then Chaya has acted correctly in responding to Sarah's question and providing her with some sound advice. If Sarah would foolishly repeat the conversation to Mr. Felder, she would be guilty of speaking Hilchos. In this segment, the Chofetz Chaim points out that one would also be guilty of Hilchos by repeating the conversation to Mr. Felder's wife or other close relatives. They too might feel personally offended upon hearing what Chaya's husband had to say about Mr. Felder's appliance experience. As with Loshon Hara, it is forbidden to speak Hilchos about a Jew to a non-Jew. Who fixed your sidewalk, Mr. McVeigh? My neighbor, Mr. Friedman, he did a good job and gave me a good price, only $1,200. You call that a good price? I could have gotten you someone who would have done the same job for $1,000. In this conversation, nothing has been accomplished other than to make Mr. McVeigh upset with his Jewish neighbor, who claimed to have been doing the job for a bargain price. Even if it would be true that someone else would have done the job for less, the job was already done and had already been paid for. And who is to say that the person who charges $1,000 would have done the same quality work? As the saying goes, you get what you pay for. It is possible that Mr. Friedman's work is actually worth more than the price he charged. Criticizing someone's work is no simple matter. In a nutshell, again, we may not tell someone a negative report concerning his or her close relative. We may not speak Hilchos to a non-Jew. In a nutshell, relatives cannot speak Hilchos to one another except in a situation where they are suffering emotional pain and need to unburden themselves between spouses. Mrs. Atlas cannot wait for her husband to come home from work. As soon as he walks to the door, she exclaims, "You'll never believe what I overheard today. I was in the supermarket, and the store was quite empty and unusually quiet. That's how I was able to stand in aisle 3 and overhear a conversation between Mrs. Engelman and Mrs. Dillman in aisle 2. They were discussing the upcoming show elections. I couldn't believe my ears. Mrs. Dillman said that her husband was not voting for you because he was unhappy with how you chaired the finance committee this past year. Isn't that a chutzpah? You were the first chairman to ever get the shul's finances in order." Mrs. Atlas had spoken Hilchos to her husband. Just as a husband and a wife are not permitted to speak Loshon Hara to one another, so too they cannot speak Hilchos. The Chofetz Chaim adds an important insight. When we think into the matter well, we discover that aside from the actual sin, when a husband believes Hilchos that was told to him by his wife, he brings many difficult problems upon himself. For when his wife sees that he happily accepts her sinful words, she will frequently come to him with such reports. This will lead to his becoming angry, depressed, and involved in arguments. Therefore, a God-fearing person will tell his wife not to relate such matters to him. As we noted in day 81, there are situations where a wife is permitted to share with her husband what would normally be considered Loshon Hara. The great tzaddik and posek of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach crystallized this idea in the following way. For a marriage to function properly, a husband and wife must share their feelings. If a woman is disturbed by something involving her dealings with others, and she feels that she must unburden herself, her husband should not thrust her aside by saying, "No, it's Loshon Hara." If the problem is too difficult for her to bear alone, He must share her packet of tzaros and help her overcome them. Of course, their purpose in discussing such matters must be to reach a solution to the problem and to alleviate her pain, not to gossip and degrade a fellow Jew. Even while letting off steam, the husband and wife must be careful to abide by the laws of Loshon Hara and not say that which is unnecessary to express negative opinions about certain people. An example of the above is where a woman is being mistreated by her employer and needs to speak to her husband about it. However, in our example involving the shul elections, there was no reason why Mrs. Atlas had to tell her husband of the conversations she overheard in the supermarket. To the contrary, as the Chofetz Chaim points out, she is actually hurting her husband by repeating such information to him. He will become angry and aggravated, assuming he transgresses the sin of believing Hilchos, and will not be able to change the situation for the better. A good wife should do her best to uproot such conversation from her mind and act as if she never heard it. In a nutshell, relatives cannot speak Hilchos to one another except in a situation where they are suffering emotional pain and need to unburden themselves. Have a wonderful day.